Impact Ripple podcast, the go-to source for hiring and leadership made simple, doable, and fun for visionary female business owners. I'm your host, Ashley Cox, author, certified HR expert, and founder of Sprout HR. And I believe that you don't have to change who you are to be a great leader, because you already are one. Join me as we kiss uncertainty and overwhelm goodbye and say hello to the tools and support you need to grow a profitable, sustainable, impactful team with more confidence and ease. On today's episode, Dannie Lynn Fountain joins me for an informative, resource-filled, and encouraging conversation on disability inclusion and creating more accessible businesses and workplaces. Dannie Lynn Fountain is a multi-passionate human. By day, she's a disability accommodations program manager at Google, and by night, she supports clients and brands with HR-focused diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. Her focus is on expanding disability inclusion within DEIB efforts by equipping people with the tools to craft change within their own situations, regardless of their seniority at work or authority within their team. Dannie Lynn has been interviewed or quoted in the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Bustle, Bloomberg, Business Insider, Cosmopolitan, Digiday, The Every Girl, Girl Boss, and more. Dannie Lynn's latest book, Ending Checkbox Diversity, Rewriting the Story of Performative Allyship in Corporate America, was a #1 Amazon new release and is available everywhere you buy books. In this episode, Dannie Lynn shares her personal journey from marketing expert turned DEI advocate and professional. She helps us explore the language of inclusion, encourages us to observe and consider how people interact with the world around them, and gives us loads of easy and actionable ideas to create more inclusive and accessible businesses and workplaces for all of our team members. One of the most surprising parts of our conversation is the shocking statistic that Dannie shares about how many companies don't actually include disability accommodations and accessibility in their DEI programs. I was blown away, and I think that you will be too. So join us on your favorite podcast app, read the transcript at sprouthr.co, or watch us on YouTube as you tune in for our conversation with Dannie Lynn Fountain. Hey there, and welcome to the Impact Ripple podcast. Dannie, I am so excited to have you here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I know we were talking about this before we started, but this feels like a little friend reunion.
It does. It does. You know, Dannie and I were actually talking about, for our listeners, how we met. And I told her, I was looking through my emails, and we've known each other forever now. So, I mean, maybe we just materialized as friends one day, but we figured it out. We met in a Facebook group, Savvy Business Owners, like back in 2015. And that was when Facebook groups were, helpful and a great place to connect and do business. They weren't full of spam and spite. But, Dannie has been one of my dearest friends and greatest advocates as a business owner. So thank you, Dannie, just for being there and being a friend and always being so encouraging. I just love and appreciate you so much. And I'm excited to bring you to our audience.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, because honestly, ditto. When my book came out and all of the things, you were always one of the first people in the comments, and I so appreciate it.
Oh, you are so welcome. Okay, well, we'll stop our love fest because we could probably go on and on about this forever. But let's get into what we're here to talk about today, because you all are going to just soak in this conversation. It is a conversation that we need to have, that we're not having enough of. And Dannie is one of my favorite people to follow and to learn from and to understand more about this topic. And our conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice in the workplace. But specifically today, we're going to be focusing on disability inclusion and accessibility. Such important topics. And I think that you're going to hear some things today that are going to be very surprising. You might feel called out on, That's okay. That's part of the learning process. But we're going to go on this journey together and really talk about some important things and ways that small businesses can create more disability inclusion and accessibility specifically, because there's a whole lot we can do. And we have way less red tape to wade through in order to implement some of these ideas that we're going to talk about today. So, Dannie, start us off. Tell us a little bit about your wild, amazing, eclectic journey and how you came to be doing this incredibly important work you're doing today.
Oh my gosh. Well, when we met, funny enough, at the time, I was a full-time entrepreneur. I had left my first job out of undergrad. I had been working in marketing for like a year and a half, 2 years. And at the time, I was a full-time marketing consultant, which we talk about this a lot in the online business owner space, but sometimes the things that you're really good at aren't always the things that you love. And
Mm,
that was very much the case for me. Fantastic marketer, continues to serve me well, not my zone of passion.
mm,
And so, right around the time, 2017, right around the time I got hired at Google, I got hired into a sales job at Google. It quickly became painfully evident like, yep, okay, we're good at this, but we don't like it. Which began this kind of evolution. I ended up getting a master's and a doctorate in HR, slowly pivoted my career into the HR space, and now work full time as a disability accommodations program manager at Google, and still run that very same business from over a decade ago, just slightly repositioned as a DEI consultant, author, all of the things, book influencer, I guess.
I love it. Yes, if you are into reading, Dannie reads like 1,000 books a week. I'm sure of it. I'm not sure that that's a very accurate total, but it's approximate. But she always has the best reviews. I love reading your book reviews. I love seeing what you're reading, and it is a wide range of books. So if you have any love of any genre, just follow Dannie. I'm sure she'll read love.
Oh, it is fascinating to me. I'm starting to put together my end of year book post. I know this is not what the
Mhm.
topic of the podcast is about,
I
but
like I like tangents.
I think there's like 37 genres represented in the, as of this morning, 500 books I've read this year,
Oh my
which
gosh.
is wild.
I mean, I know this isn't part of our conversation either, but I think everybody would be fascinated to know, including myself, how do you read 500 books a year?
Well, I don't watch TV.
Mhm.
So, in the average, which I found this stat the other day and was fascinated, the average American watches, I think, 4.6 hours of TV a day. So, if you
Mm,
take that and replace it with reading,
mhm. There you go.
and then obviously, whenever I'm driving, whenever I'm walking somewhere, whenever I'm doing house chores, there's always an audiobook going.
Mm.
So you add those together, and there's like my baseline. The average human between social media and TV probably spends 7 hours consuming that content, and that is all reading for me.
There you
So
go. So you just have your priorities where
yeah,
you have your priorities, whether it's
yeah,
reading or watching TV or, mindlessly scrolling TikTok. Look at the weirdest recipe that's popped up this week.
yeah, exactly.
I love it. I
Oh,
love it. Well, I think that's what makes you so accessible in your content as well, is
mm,
that you don't just talk about work all the time. You bring in these other elements of your life and your experience as a human on this earth, and I think that that makes it feel like, oh, okay, Danny's a friend. And I think that's so important in the work that you do and the way that you show up, because when you have something important to say, people are already leaning in. And
mhm.
I think that that's so powerful. So I just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate you for that as well.
I just will say, I mean, you've been in this business world as long as I have. We've been hearing the niche down message for the last decade.
Mhm.
And like my autistic and ADHD brain just can't. Niche
Yeah.
is not the thing. I have 7 niches.
I know. I'm always like, I don't know that I want to do any one thing forever. I love
Hmm.
to experiment and explore and do different things and try this
Exactly.
and that and the other. And so I get it for
Exactly.
Oh, and I love that you mentioned, like my neurodiverse brain, because that's
Yeah.
something we're talking so much more about, and that's part of the conversation today. So I'd love for you
Mm.
to share a little bit more about how you got interested in this DEI work, because I know a lot of it is very personal for you.
Oh gosh, yeah. To be very honest, I present as a white, straight, neurotypical woman, and I walk through life that way. And I keep calling myself the wolf in sheep's clothing because people say shit to my face
Mm.
that if they knew my identities would never come out of their mouth. And personal life through to professional life through to entrepreneurship. And if you're familiar with what it means to be autistic, autistic folks are very justice sensitive, very, very, very strong sense of right and wrong, whatever that is defined for you personally. And injustice in the form of marginalization is just that one topic that sets me the frick off.
Mm.
And so, really, it came out of, well, if I'm talking about this all the time, and if I'm arguing on the internet about this all the time, and if I'm telling people in my personal life that they need to stop saying this all the time, why is it not my job? And it's only in the last about 4 months that personal and professional have collided, that my job at Google is actually also DEI focused too. But really, it just came out of lived experience, which you will find for many DEI folks is true. Like, if I'm going to sit here and I'm going to educate you about my lived experience, I might as well get paid to do it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Pay the people for their labor because
Yes.
it is a labor. It's an emotional labor. It's a mental
Mm-hmm.
labor. Sometimes it's a physical labor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of times people love to play dumb. They love to not remember that their phone also has Google, not,
Mm-hmm.
not just the company, but the whole search engine where we
Mm-hmm.
can research and we can learn and we can hear different voices and different perspectives. And so, it's a lot of that unpaid labor or even expected labor um,
Mm-hmm.
that I think you hit the nail on the head. It grinds your gears to the point where it's like, well, if I'm going to keep talking about this, like, let's get paid for it.
Yeah,
Feels
precisely.
feels fair. That feels just, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about one of the first things I think that can be really intimidating to folks when we start talking about DEI, and that's the language of DEI, and
Mm-hmm.
language of inclusivity. This is something that you address in your book, which I'm going to shamelessly plug right now. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you're going to see a copy of Danny's book. And it's called Ending Checkbox Diversity, Rewriting the Story of Performative Allyship in Corporate America. What a powerful title. But one of the things that you address in the book is the language of inclusivity. And something that you said was that more people want to be inclusive, they want to participate, but we often make diversity language or inclusivity language real fancy, and so people get scared. And I'd love to hear some more of your thoughts on that and some of the things that you have found helpful in talking about DEI and breaking some of that fear down.
Yeah. Ooh. So I got to tell you, the original working title of that book was Corporate America's Modern Plague. And it's in part because of this specific topic.
Mhm.
We intellectualize and academify and over theorize so much of DEIB work. I don't know if you or anyone follow Blair Amani on Instagram, who creates these Smarter in Seconds snippets, taking all of these DEI topics in literally 30 seconds or less, breaking them down. But that barrier to being inclusive feels so high because there's all of these $10 words involved in the work of DEIB that frankly gatekeep people out of it.
Mhm.
And it it's very hard to be someone who has like lived your life a specific way and then comes face to face with this understanding that like, wow, my life has been really beautiful because I've been walking paved roads and someone else out there has gravel roads.
Mhm.
And you want to dip your toes in, you want to understand, but the Google results require you to have a thesaurus and a doctorate degree to even understand what's going on. And that just
Mhm.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so when we peel back all of DEI, BJ, whichever letters you're using, many folks use a different assortment of A in there for accessibility. When you peel back all of that, it really boils down to nobody started at the same starting line, but we want everyone to be able to reach the finish line. And when you really simplify it down to that, it gets a lot more understandable. It's really popular on TikTok to watch that privilege walk. And two people start on the same line and they talk about the different things that they had in their life and they step forward if they had these things. And it's a visual demonstration of that. Not everybody starts on the same starting line, but we want everyone to have access to the finish line. And when you just start to conceptualize it in that way, it becomes a no-brainer. Like, yeah, I want my neighbor to reach the finish line too, but it gets a lot more simple.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And even sometimes I think what really freaks people out is making a mistake, right? Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to say the wrong thing and then I'm going to be ostracized or I'm going to be canceled or I'm going to be shamed or whatever it is. But I would venture to say that that's a small percentage of people who would actually respond in such a negative manner. I believe most people want to help each other understand or use the proper language. But what is your advice for people who are like, I just don't want to offend my people, specifically thinking like leaders to teams. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing. I don't want to offend my people, but I want to be more inclusive. I want to use more of this language to create a place where people feel like they really belong and they're valued.
Yeah, there's almost this balancing of intent and impact,
Mhm,
right? We can have positive intent and still have harmful impact.
mhm,
And harmful impact creates labor, creates emotional experiences, creates harm. But malicious intent combined with harmful impact obviously hurts the most.
mhm,
Positive intent combined with harmful impact, that's where that like I messed up, but hopefully people can recognize and come alongside. And then positive intent and positive impact is beautiful.
mhm,
And so most leaders are probably fearful of being in that middle one. They have a really positive intent, but the impact just really isn't there. uh, and there's just a few things that you can keep in mind here. One piece of it is the ego piece.
mhm,
Even if you have really positive intent, um, that doesn't mean you get to be really defensive when it has negative or harmful impact.
mhm,
It is far better to have negative or harmful impact and really listen instead of saying, well, my intent was really positive here.
mhm,
So just like being open to conversations around it. Also not being afraid to have conversations and to learn. And if you are in a company or a leadership role where you do have a budget accessible to you, paying for that learning,
mhm,
please.
mhm.
Um, so instead of like having employee roundtables, have like truly compensated time, whatever that means. Um, but all of this to say, um, just don't assume that you know everything or that your worldview is correct. Even in the DEI space, every single DEI practitioner enters the space through their own lens. I name over and over and over again that the way that I feel the most marginalized is disability. And so that tends to be the lens through which I look at things because my other marginalizations, I experience a lot of white passing privilege from. And the same is true for leadership. Like as you are learning and understanding and evolving, you're still going to hold your own biases and just naming that. So all of this that I'm saying is have genuine, wholehearted, like to your core positive intent, but then set aside the ego when you inevitably um, have a harmful impact or outcome, and just be open to evolving.
Ugh, I love that. It's so beautifully said. And I love how you kind of tied it all together there at the end because it really doesn't have to be as hard as we like to make it. And I think sometimes we like to make it a little harder when we aren't a marginalized identity.
Mhm.
We like to pretend that things are harder than they are instead of saying, you know what, every now and then I'm going to step in the shit and that's okay. because I think that that's how we learn. If we look at like adult learning techniques, the best way that adults learn is by doing, not by sitting back, not just by reading, not just by listening, but by actually getting involved. And you can't get involved in DEI conversations and creating and building an inclusive workplace unless you actually get involved and you do it. I think that's so important is we have to actively be doing the work and not just giving it lip service as well.
Yeah, I think especially in the executive space, in corporate America, we talk a lot about executive sponsorship, but we never talk about follow up.
Mhm.
And so for both corporate folks and small business owners, it's not that first statement that matters. It's the continued follow through. It's the demonstration that this is integral to how I and my business or my company operate, that really starts to put that positive into the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, like really dive into the conversation around disability accommodations. What does this mean? And how do we know if we're doing it or we're not doing it? And what else can we do? Just kind of start at the beginning and then we'll kind of explore all those conversations. So what are disability accommodations? What do we need to know?
Yeah. So I'm going to ground us in two pieces of context. So
Okay.
first, there is a stat that was published, I believe, in a 2020 Harvard Business Review article that says although 90% of companies claim to prioritize diversity, only 4% include disability in that, which is fascinating when you consider there are over 1 billion disabled people in the world. 1 in 4 Americans are disabled. COVID was a mass disabling event. That number of disabled folks is only growing. And disabled folks are one of the largest and most intersectional marginalized identities out there. It doesn't matter your national origin, your race, your sexuality, you can be disabled too. It is intersectional. And also, there is also a growing cohort of folks that use the phrasing temporarily able-bodied, because as we all age, or if we experience a freak accident, we can become disabled too. Once you hit 60, 70, you're doing more dying than living. And disability may become a part of your life too. So all of this to say, one of the largest, one of the most intersectional identities, and it's the one with the lowest barrier to entry. You can't change your race, but you can certainly change your ability status, and sometimes not even by choice.
Yeah.
So all of that is a foundation.
Mhm.
Disability is at the same time one of the least understood, most challenged, marginalized identities, as seen in that stat that only 4% of companies are prioritizing.
Yeah,
So,
let's talk about that just for a second. I want you
yeah,
to repeat that statistic because I want for people to listen. So if you missed it, here's your chance to listen. Tell us
yeah,
the stat again, Danny.
yeah. Although 90% of companies, as of 2020, claim to prioritize diversity, only 4% consider disability within that.
That's just such a mind-blowing statistic.
Yeah,
Absolutely
painful,
mind-blowing.
painful.
If you are saying that you are prioritizing DE&I in your workspace and you're not including disabled individuals in that programming, you're part of that 96%, right? That's
Yeah.
not. Mm,
Let's also, this is one of my favorite topics too. Let's also separate the medical and legal definitions of disability as well.
yes.
So, pregnant folks are considered temporarily disabled during the course of their pregnancy.
Mhm.
Obese folks aren't always medically considered disabled without a comorbidity, but frequently are legally considered disabled because they can experience um, discrimination based on their body size
Yes.
in the workplace. So let's also be aware that, like, what we traditionally historically think of as disability is a limiting definition of as well as like we start to talk about neurodiversity,
Mhm.
chronic illness,
Invisible
especially.
is,
Yeah, there is so much to disability that unfortunately is not surprising that it doesn't get included.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so hopefully this is all grounding to then understand disability accommodations is then whether in corporate America, whether in small business, whether in how you show up online.
Mhm.
Disability accommodations is, again, if someone's not starting at the same starting line, we want them to reach the same finish line. So disability accommodations in corporate America is a formal process that provides accommodations, making it helping the starting line so that someone can do their job successfully. Disability accommodations, both online and in small business, you may not have those. You may not have employees, you may not be providing those sorts of accommodations, but what you can and should be doing is weaving accessibility through everything that you do. Instagram has inbuilt captions. If you are posting an Instagram story where there is noise, no excuse to not have captions. Just that base sort of stuff. If you're posting text-based images, please put that text in the Instagram caption as well. Just all of those components that should be standard business practice today is kind of the starting point.
For sure. And we still see comments. Like I saw, this might have been 2 or 3 weeks ago, somebody had put the text captioning over their Instagram reel or story or whatever it was. And somebody in the comments literally said, "How annoying is this text? We're not deaf." And the barrage of comments of individuals who were hard of hearing and deaf came into that comment, educating this individual that you might not be, but there are plenty of us who are, and we appreciate those captions.
And just the accessibility in that. So as we're recording this, it's about a week and a half after the release of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the Hunger Games prequel. That movie came out on a Thursday night, Friday. I had to wait until the following Saturday to go see it because I had to wait until AMC had one of their open caption showings. That's the most accessible way for me to go to the movies. Captions, you would be amazed at the number of people who use captions on a day-to-day basis and not putting them in your Instagram stories, not having them on the movie screen. Like, I had to wait. I mean, boo-hoo, I had to wait a week and a day to see this movie. But if I want to participate in the discourse around this movie, I'm 8 days behind.
Right?
Captions are so major and such a baseline thing to do.
It really is. And it's really become so much more accessible for us to even use caption because they're built right into so many of the online tools that we use.
Oh, yeah.
It's not that it's something that we have to pay thousands of dollars for. It's literally accessible at our fingertips, and it's the click of like 2 buttons.
Yeah. Google Meet and Zoom both have live availability. I'm not familiar with the other platforms, but I'm sure like GoToMeeting and WebEx do as well. But I mean, Instagram is, again, a fantastic example. If you're posting a story where you're talking, click that caption sticker.
Yeah,
Please.
for sure. For sure. We can all create more accessible content, connection, building, relationships with people, and making sure that people are not excluded from the conversation, but they're able to participate in real time, not on a delay, not, after they've had somebody else come in and interpret it for them. But I think that that's something that I've still kind of blown away that we don't see more of that. And like you said, also, if you're putting out text posts and they're in the, in the carousel format and you've got like 5 or 6 slides to scroll through, e-readers and things online can't read those photos. And so maybe you think it's being accessible for people, but if you're blind, if you are, unable to see well, if you can't see on a tiny little screen that's, only like 2 inches wide, maybe you just have a hard time seeing. Like, that's also something, putting it in the caption allows those tools to be able to read that out loud for people. So here we're kind of tackling from 2 different sides. We've got the visibility accessibility and then the auditory accessibility as well.
Yeah. And even if the accessibility component to you doesn't make sense, which is a whole separate conversation, spend a day observing how many people around you watch Instagram stories and TikToks with their sound off, with no headphones on.
Me, I read almost everything online.
Yeah, I mean, the day that TikTok released 2x speed was life-changing because I started listening to things again. But even if the accessibility piece, like, isn't sinking in, just observe from a social there was a stat that was like millennials are now the largest users of captions, like on Netflix, etc.
Mm.
Um,
Oh yeah,
just observe.
my captions live on Netflix. I feel like as soon as I turn them off, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Um,
Truly, yeah.
and I'm like, if you need me to pay attention to something, I need to have captioning.
Hmm.
And if somebody's talking too slow, I'm such a fan of the 2x speed as well.
Hmm.
Like my brain has already either left the studio or it's 10 steps ahead and I'm like, I know what you're going to say. Hurry up already.
I mean, Instagram needs to get on that because it's literally to the point now when I see someone post a reel on Instagram, I go look up their username on TikTok so I can watch it on 2x speed.
I love that. I love that. Find your own
Yeah.
ways to be more accessible to content.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So let's talk about some of the ways that, or some common challenges perhaps that people with disabilities face in the workplace. So now we've got, an understanding about accessibility and how do we, create content and reach out to people in multiple different ways that they can participate. But how do we help overcome, some of those challenges that people are facing in the workplace?
Yeah, that is. Whew. So I'm
It's
gonna
a big one.
I'm gonna come at this from the neurodivergent lens because obviously that's my lived experience.
Mhm.
But then also in my day job at Google, I have some other thoughts as well.
Okay.
Um, Two big things that really get my justice sensitivity going is remote work and 40 hours of work.
Mm.
So remote work massively levels the playing field on accessibility. We have mutual friends here online with chronic illness that benefit from remote work because it makes the care for their chronic illness a lot more accessible. We also, in corporate America, see reduced need for short-term disability leave if folks are able to work remotely because it makes their chronic illness care a lot more accessible. Remote work also is really supportive of neurodivergence. It's supportive of second and third trimester pregnancy as well. First trimester too, honestly, without morning sickness, if you don't have to travel into the office, amazing.
Mhm.
And then the 40-hour work week too. This one, so usually these two comments go hand in hand. Oh, I don't know if I can allow my employees to work remote because how do I know that they're working 40 hours a week?
Yes. Ugh.
Can we let go of the Henry Ford mentality, please? Because I talk about this with colleagues all the time. In my job as a program manager, half of my job is case management, but then a lot of my job is also ideation, strategy development, etc. A teammate and I were working on a project together, and he would get so frustrated because I would produce in 30 minutes what took him 3 hours to produce. And it
Mhm.
was the benefit of ADHD and autistic hyperfixation that I just like.
Mhm.
Both of my books, so the book that you have in your hand, the book coming out in 2024, don't tell my agent or editor, but both of them were written in the 36 hours before manuscript deadline
Oh my gosh.
because of
Mhm.
hyperfocus.
Which
And
is
if
such a benefit
oh
that
yeah,
employers should be able to leverage, but not require a 40-hour work week
well,
because
and that's
clearly.
yeah. I was talking to this coworker and I was like, yeah, I do that in 30 minutes, but then literally I spend the next 2 hours reading, just like
Mhm.
emptying my brain back out. And
Mhm.
so technically it takes you and I both
Mhm.
3 hours because I produce in 30 minutes and then need to like get my brain right again. And
Mhm.
it takes you three. So, but if we think about the work week as this traditional 40 hours of consistent output and production, 8 hours, it doesn't work like that. If
No.
me and this coworker are producing the same amount of work in 40 hours, and I'm needing 2 hour spurts of reading, and he's diligently at a consistent pace doing his work in 40 hours, we have to pivot to an output based structure. So
100%.
in corporate America, those two are the biggest and the most umbrella over all disability. If you're measured based on output instead of but in C hours, and if remote work is a consistent option. But other forms of accessibility include the traditional things that you might think of, like major employers typically will provide ASL interpreters. Other major employers will also provide ASL education for teammates of deaf team members.
If you're not familiar with ASL, American Sign Language.
Which, and if you're not in America, BSL, FSL, the
The
appropriate
common
language.
sign language
Yes.
in your language form.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is a big one.
Or even just having documents written in different languages that are represented by your employees, whether that's Spanish or it's Croatian or it's, whatever that language, Mandarin, it might be. I think that that's something that's generally pretty accessible for folks to find a translator, get the documents transcribed, and pay very nominally to create documents that folks can read, understand. Could you imagine trying to read and understand a contract that's not in your first language?
Yeah.
It'd be incredibly difficult.
Oh,
or,
yeah.
A project scope, proposal or something. So I think even thinking about how can we take the documents that we have and make sure that if somebody on our team doesn't have English as a first language, and that's our default, that we say, would this be helpful to have this document in your first language?
Yeah, that's there's this concept of prestige language. So prestige language is the language in the workplace most commonly used by executives and those in power. And if you are not a fluent speaker or a native speaker of the prestige language, there can be a tremendous amount of exclusion there that I can spend hours on that topic also.
This could seriously be its own separate podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Entirely. But we're going to tackle as much as we can today.
But coming back to, I think, two more accommodations that folks don't typically think about. Travel accommodations, I think we default to the most cost effective, but not all employees can fly in the morning of. Some folks need to fly in the night before. And then around travel accommodations too, just because an employee is traveling to the site doesn't mean that they also want to do after hour social stuff. So travel, and then as well, if the employee traveling is a mother, if the employee traveling has a physical disability or a chronic illness that requires considerations, building that in, especially I feel like 2023, like we were back to business travel. So that's, I think, is something important to think about. Yeah. And then also meeting structure. If your job is wall-to-wall meetings, no. Having a culture that at least finds a balance between live and asynchronous meetings. There's three types of meetings. There's information sharing, decision making, and brainstorming. Most information sharing meetings can be an email.
Yes. Say it again, sister. Oh my goodness.
Oh, so those, when we're thinking about small business too, these are like some of the more broadly applicable accommodations. There's a ton of accommodations that are case by case, very individual and consultative, but these are some of the broader things that we can think about.
Oh, I love this. Thank you so much for sharing these, because I feel like a lot of times, as small business owners, we think, well, I only have one employee. That one employee still matters, and their needs still matter. And if there's an opportunity for us to create a more accessible and inclusive culture for that one person, we should do it. I think that it's easy to think, oh, but when I have 100 employees, that'll matter. That'll make a difference.
I think the legal minimum requirement is either 5 or 15. Well, not that we need to only adhere when it's a legal requirement.
And it's different in each state. Like what you're required to do is one conversation.
It's a whole baseline.
What you should do as a human is a whole different conversation. But there's states that have a minimum of 5, and the federal government's minimum is 15 for actual Americans with Disability Act accommodations. So if you have a team of 15 or more, you're at least federally required to provide accommodations. But if you have under 15 and you're a team of 1 or a team of 5 or a team of 8, like,
still the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do. But I think that, just some of the conversation that we're having around this, there's so many easy and accessible and free, or at least low cost ways that we can create more accessibility. And I think, honestly, the conversation can start with, how can we make our workplace better together?
If we just normalized as part of onboarding or during your one-on-one conversations, asking what is your working style,
Mm,
we would eliminate the need for so many accommodations.
yes.
At one company I worked for, I literally had to get an accommodation for feedback in writing because, oh, that's a working style. No, literally, my brain will not process your feedback unless you give it to me in writing.
Hmm.
If we can normalize just having conversations around folks' working styles,
Hmm.
that'd be great.
Yes, yes. And we're allowed to ask that.
Yeah.
That's okay for us to say, hey, what's your preferred working style? How do you
Mm-hmm.
work best? Is there anything we can do to support you doing your
Mm-hmm.
best job? Those are easy conversations for us to have, and they should be happening right at the onset of employment. If
Mm-hmm.
you haven't had those conversations, it's okay to go back now and say, hey, every day I'm learning. And this is something that I've learned today.
Yeah.
What can we do to make our workplace better?
Mm-hmm.
Let's brainstorm this together. And again, if you are thinking about, well, I don't want to belabor the point with people. I don't want to, make them do that labor. Hire somebody. There's some incredibly talented people out there. Danny, who do you recommend to do this work with? I'm assuming perhaps yourself.
For a lot of the accessibility work on Instagram, Mabel EQ, Erin Perkins is amazing. For corporate accessibility, there's a number of folks and resources. Yes, myself as well. Um, what I would really encourage, maybe I'm jumping to ahead here, but what I would really encourage is if you do nothing else with the teams that you work with, create user guides. So you can Google user guide, but like if you've ever unboxed a new blender and read the manual on how to set up the blender, it's basically a parallel. User guides talk about working style, when someone prefers to log on and log off. Do they prefer email, chat, phone call, video call, blah, blah, blah. If you create or download off the internet a template and just do that for everyone, that is a phenomenal zero cost baseline place to start, because then you can aggregate them all in one place as new employees on board. They can even for contractors, like, please,
Mhm.
this contractor does their work overnight, so that's when they're going to do their best work.
Mhm.
um, Easy, low cost, low barrier to entry, is an accommodation without needing an ADA process.
Yes, yes. The ADA process is definitely something a little bit more robust and nuanced, but this is just a simple way to ask for what people need and
Mm-hmm.
not make assumptions. Because when
Yeah.
we make assumptions, we can go all sorts of sideways with that.
Yeah. You also might discover that, like, every single person on your team hates the Monday all hands meeting because they prefer to do like deep work from 9 to noon. But
Yeah,
you're going to learn things about your team doing
for
user
sure.
guides.
For sure. And if you're struggling with hiring, let me just drop this little nugget in there because I looked this up the other day. And the latest data that we have from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is 2022, reported that only 21.3% of employees with a disability were employed, or people with a disability were employed, compared to 65.5% of people without a disability. So we have a huge gap of people who are not employed, who want to be employed, who could do brilliant work if only we had an inclusive and accessible workplace for them to be able to do that work. So if you're thinking about hiring, struggling to hire, think nobody wants to work anymore, there are plenty of people out there who want to work. And we can create incredible workplaces, incredible cultures where they feel welcomed and where they feel included and where they can participate just as much as anyone else in the workplace. So just something to think about there as well. So as we wind down our conversation today, it's time for our final and favorite segment of the show, which is Imagine the Impact. And so, Danny, I'd love for you to help us paint the vision for our listeners of the kind of impact they could create with one key thought or takeaway or action item from our conversation today, either something you've already shared or something new that maybe you haven't had an opportunity to talk about yet.
I think the one thing that I would say, both in corporate America and in small business, we talk about repurposing content all the time. So taking one piece of content that may have been a blog post, making it an email, making it an Instagram post, etc. Think about accessibility in a similar way. Ensure every piece of content that you create has 2 or more entry points. So if it's a video, it also has captioning. If it's a photo, there's also an image description or alt text. Just make sure that every piece of content that you create has 2 or more entry points.
Oh, I love that. I mean, just imagine the impact that we could create by allowing ourselves to explore the opportunities that exist with accessibility. I think, we could touch more people. We could create more welcoming environments. We could hire more people. We could give more people opportunities to do meaningful, impactful work in this world who maybe otherwise have been left on the sidelines. So, Dannie, this has been such an amazing conversation, as I knew it would be. I feel like I could just talk to you forever and ever and all eternity on this topic. And it's so nuanced and so detailed. So I know that folks are going to love to connect with you. Where can they do that to learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, definitely the best place is on Instagram at Dannie Lynn Fountain. That tends to be the hub that I have going on.
Perfect. Perfect. So we've mentioned a lot of really fantastic resources today. I'll make sure that we drop all of those links in the show notes for you so that you can have access to that quickly and easily. All of our podcast episodes are transcribed and uploaded to our website. So if you can't listen, you can join us by reading. You can also view it on YouTube if you like to watch instead of listen or read. So we've got lots of entry points here for our podcast. And we're always looking for opportunities to create more accessible content. So if there's something that would help you to access our content better, please just let us know. You can always drop us a line at hello@sprouthr.co. Thank you so much, Dannie, for joining us today on the Impact Ripple podcast.
Of course. Have a good one.
Thank you. And thank you, dear leader, for tuning into our conversation today. I hope that you found it enlightening, inspiring, encouraging, and so much more. As always, it is an honor and a privilege to be here with and for you on your leadership journey.